that record or something? Okay, fabulous. All right, it's wonderful to see all of you. And let's go ahead and finish our discussion of chapter 1, the very famous chapter on the debate between Socrates, Cephalus, Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus about justice. And there are a few things I want to talk about, and then we're going to turn to Polemarchus's account of justice, and then finally we'll finish our discussion with a discussion of the very famous, one of the most famous debates or discussions or passages in all of political philosophy, the discussion between Thrasymachus and Socrates. And so if you've got your book, that would be great. If you've got it, open it up. We're on page 7. And we left off on Tuesday with the discussion between Cephalus and Socrates. And Cephalus, who was Polemarchus's father, quite old at this time, Cephalus and Socrates got into a conversation about why it is the case that Cephalus is kind of bearing his old age so well. And that Socrates said to him, and by the way, they're at Cephalus's house. Remember, they all left the festival, and they went to Polemarchus's house. And when they arrived, Polemarchus's father, Cephalus, is there, and Socrates and Cephalus are both similar to age, and they know each other well, but haven't seen each other in a long time. And so a conversation between Cephalus and Socrates develops, and Socrates says to Cephalus, and I'm paraphrasing, "Boy, Cephalus, you look really great. You look content, you look peaceful, you look happy. What is it that you attribute this kind of well-being, to use that word loosely? What is it that you attribute your well-being at such an old age to?" And Cephalus says, "Well, I'm fortunate because I'm wealthy, and money has allowed me to near the end of my life without owing anybody anything. I don't owe any debts in terms of money to people, and I've been able to provide all the sacrifices, by which he means contributing money to the city so they can fund public sacrifices and that stuff." So Cephalus says, I can attribute my well-being, and well-being now becomes a kind of substitute for justice. I can attribute my well-being or my sense of justice in my old age to the fact that I don't owe anything. And we saw that this became a discussion. This became the first account of what justice is. And for Cephalus and his generation, and this is one version of the Homeric notion of justice, justice is giving back what you owe. Giving back what you owe. And of course, I'm not going to run through the whole thing again. We saw how Socrates responded to that. Socrates said, "That's wonderful, Cephalus. That's very interesting, but would it be just to return weapons to a person you've borrowed them from, and they're asking for them now in an altered state of mind, and something bad's going to come of it?" So again, Cephalus's position was easily dismissed, and that's where we left off. And in the middle of page 7, as the conversation between Cephalus and Socrates is coming to an end, Socrates says, "Well, Cephalus, it wouldn't be just to return the weapons to, even if they're not yours, but it wouldn't be just to return them to a person who's asking for them, and he or she's clearly not in a good state of mind, and we can surmise that some injustice or something bad's going to come of it, right?" And Cephalus says, and I'm right in the middle of page 7 on 331d, and Cephalus says, "What you say is right," he said. Cephalus says, "I see your point. That's a good point, Socrates," Cephalus says. And then Socrates says, "Then this isn't the definition of justice, right? Speaking the truth and giving back what one takes." Now, So Socrates has found a counterexample, right? Cephalus said that justice is giving back what one owes. And in this classic Platonic dialectic fashion, if you can find a counterexample, if you can find an example like Socrates has done to demonstrate how, in this case, giving back what you owe would not be justice, it would in fact be unjust. If you can find a counterexample, then of course that can't be the pure definition of justice, because you found a counterexample. All right. And so Cephalus says, oh, you're right. I see what you mean. Good point, Socrates. Now, at this moment, something profound, something quite deep and quite profound is taking place. Now, the next line is, right, Socrates says to Cephalus, then this isn't the definition of justice, speaking the truth and giving back what one takes. And immediately after Socrates says that, Cephalus, Cephalus' son, speaks up. And he says, it most certainly is, Socrates, interrupted Cephalus. At least if Simonides, the poet Simonides, should be believed at all. Well then, said Cephalus. Well then, said the father. I hand down the argument to you, Cephalus, my son. For it's already time for me to look after the sacrifices. And Cephalus says, well, am I not the heir of what belongs to you? Talking to the father, said Cephalus. And the father, Cephalus, says, certainly, he said and laughed. And with that, he went away to do the sacrifices. Okay. So Plato's a genius. And what has just happened has been told in the most fluid, poetic, funny, human exchange in the narrative. Socrates and Cephalus, the father, are having a conversation kind of about justice. Cephalus tells him what he thinks justice is. Socrates says, that's really interesting, but what about this? And Cephalus says, oh, you're right. Yeah, that's a good point, right? So Socrates says, that can't be what justice is. And then the son, Cephalus, says, oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is, right? If we're going to believe Simonides. And then the father Cephalus says, all right, thank you, son, Cephalus, right? I'm going to hand off my role in the discussion. I, Cephalus, am going to hand off my role in the discussion right now to you, my son, Cephalus, because the son's come to his father's defense in a sort of way, right? And the son says, but isn't that proper? I'm your son. I'm the heir. Aren't I the heir of your position? And the heir, the word heir and the position is it's being used in two ways simultaneously. Cephalus will now assume his father's position in the argument, and Cephalus is also the heir to all of the father's wealth, right? They're in Cephalus's house. They're in a very, very opulent villa down in the Piraeus, right? So Cephalus becomes the heir of the position in the argument, and Cephalus becomes the heir of what is Cephalus's wealth. And of course, the father says, yep, you sure are. It's all yours, boy. And Cephalus gets up and he says, well, it's getting late, boys. I've got to go back to the party. I've got to go tend to the sacrifices. And Socrates lets him go. Okay, and that beautiful, playful, poignant, beautifully written passage in the Republic is one of the most profound and important moments in a book of many profound and important moments. And so what has just happened? So first, what's happening here? First, it's Cephalus' house, and Cephalus is old. It would have been very rude for Socrates to insist that Cephalus stay and continue in the debate. Cephalus and Socrates engaged in a kind of a friendly conversation, right? And Cephalus gave some account of what justice is. Socrates kind of bantered back, and they had their friendly, easy conversation. But at the end of the day, Cephalus doesn't want to stay and have an intense conversation about fucking justice all night. It's not what he wants to do. It's not what he's interested in doing. And in fact, he wants to get up and go attend his sacrifices, metaphorically go back to the festival, go back to the party. And so Socrates is polite. Socrates lets him go, right? And Socrates is being both polite and strategic. And he's being polite because he lets him go because it's Cephalus's house and they're friends. And it would be rude for Socrates to insist that he stays and to question him and bother him, when in fact this is not what Cephalus wants. So Cephalus is allowed to leave, right? Socrates is polite. It's Cephalus's house, and it would be rude to demand him to stay and argue and etc. So Cephalus is allowed to leave. Now, what's the important thing here? What's the profound thing here? Cephalus represents the traditions. Cephalus represents the traditions, the Homeric traditions of a kind of aristocratic, not quite royal in this sense, but of a kind of an aristocratic patriarchy, right? Cephalus represents the Homeric traditions in a sense of kind of aristocratic patriarchy. Cephalus is the head of an aristocratic family. He's the oldest remaining male of the family. It's his house. He rules in his house. He has authority, right? Remember back when we talked about the Antigone, how is power understood in the Antigone? It's absolute, it's aristocratic, and it's paternal. Right? It's aristocratic, it's absolute, and it's paternal. That's how power is understood. And we had fun with that, talking about Creon. Creon, this is an aristocratic family that runs Thebes. Creon is the last surviving male of the family, and it's paternal. Authority and power in the Homeric traditions is understood in the kind of an aristocratic, an absolute aristocratic and paternal way. And Cephalus represents that tradition. It's not just that Cephalus said, it's not just that Cephalus gave an account of what justice is, right? It's giving back what you owe. But Cephalus it's not just his position, is what he says represents kind of the traditions, but who he is, right? Who Cephalus is in his home during this conversation is itself. He is representative of the Homeric tradition of authority. Cephalus is aristocratic. He's the remaining senior male in the family. He rules, right? And it's his house. It's his rules. He rules. And it's patriarchal, right? And so Cephalus right now in the Republic represents the notion of how power is conceived of in the Homeric traditions, right? So Cephalus is a symbol of authority in the Homeric traditions. Aristocratic, male, last and oldest, surviving male, running the household as a metaphor for the state. Okay? Now the symbolic part of this, right, is that Cephalus has to go. Right? Socrates lets Cephalus go because he's polite, but at a deeper level, in a deeper kind of philosophical and kind of political sense, it's not just that Socrates is polite because he lets Cephalus go. Cephalus and what Cephalus represents, who he is and what he represents, that must go. Right? That must go. Cephalus represents the Homeric traditions in terms of how they conceive of authority. And age, old aristocratic males are the foundation of authority in the Homeric traditions, just like Creon was, right? Cephalus must be allowed to leave the discussion. Cephalus must be dismissed, right? Because what we're talking about ultimately is replacing the Homeric traditions with a new type of authority, right? Which has always been the philosophical project anyways, right? Cephalus has to go. One, he wants to go. He doesn't really have any interest in hanging out with these young people and talking. He wants to go attend to the sacrifices. But he must go symbolically. If Cephalus stays, then the discussion about justice and the imagination, the recreation and the imagination of a new concept of who rules and why, a new concept of authority, a new concept of justice can't take place. Cephalus represents the traditions. He has to go. If he stays, a new account of authority grounded in philosophical wisdom and a new account of justice grounded in the well-ordered soul, as we will see soon, can't emerge. Right? And so this is very deep. So on the first day we talked about, the first couple of days we met together, right? And we were talking about what are the issues in the Antigone, and it wasn't just an issue in Antigone, it was an issue in political philosophy. It's power. Who rules and why? And we saw how the Homeric traditions answered that question. Royal or aristocratic families rule. They have absolute power, and it's kind of patriarchal, and it's sanctioned by some kind of conception of divinity. And we saw Socrates fighting with that all through the earlier dialogues. And ultimately, it was the tradition that killed Socrates at his trial. Ultimately, it was the old and the traditions that ultimately sentenced Socrates to death, in the first apology. And so now, as we get through the first account of what justice is, spoken by Cephalus, the symbol of the Homeric and the traditional notion of authority, aristocratic, paternal, old, absolute, right? We see that it's not just that Socrates is overcoming, right, Cephalus' notion of justice. With Cephalus's dismissal, with the fact that Cephalus is allowed to leave, we see that this is the end of the Homeric account of authority. Cephalus represents the Homeric account of authority. With his dismissal, allowing him to leave, the traditional Homeric account of authority is now going to be replaced. The profound thing here, you could even say the dark point here, but the profound thing here, the profound point being made here is that if you're going, if the conversation about justice is going to take place, if the conversation about a new conception of power and authority is going to take place, if any of these things are going to be discussed, and if progress is going to be made towards acquiring knowledge about any of them, and the using of that knowledge to build a new city, if the conversation is going to continue, the old, in this case, literally the old person, Cephalus, and the old traditions, in this case, the Homeric traditions, must be done away with. Right? And this is deep, this is heavy. Right? Cephalus has to go. Otherwise, the young men with Socrates can't move forward. The traditions have to go. The Homeric traditions have to go. Otherwise, nothing new can be created. And not just nothing new, but something better. Athens is still in fire. It's in flames. It's come apart. If Cephalus stays, if the traditions stay, nothing new can be thought, can be achieved, can be done. And not just nothing new or new for its own sake, new for just the sake of fucking doing something new, new and better. New and better. And so the dark point here is, the heavy point, is that if the philosophical conversation is going to take place between Socrates and the 8 or 9 young Athenian aristocrats, if the new city is going to be created, then Cephalus has to go. The traditions have to go. Now, one kind of profound thing to think about, very metaphorical in this sense, is the different ways in which things are dismissed. The city of Athens, the traditions executed Socrates, but in the reconceived dialogue of the Republic, the philosophers are allowed or allow the traditions to leave gently. So Cephalus is quickly dismissed. He hands the discussion over to his son, Polemarchus. Right? Polemarchus is the heir. Right? Polemarchus interrupts Socrates and say, no, my dad's kind of right. Hold on, I'm going to explain more what he's talking about. And Cephalus says, well, here, I give my spot in the discussion, and my role, my authority in this discussion to you, Polemarchus. Polemarchus says, but that's correct, because I'm your heir. Okay, so again, very profound. The transfer of power, the transfer of authority is happening in this kind of traditional way. Right? The son defends the father. The father says, I give you my position in the conversation. I give you my authority. And the son says, well, that's natural, right? Aren't I the heir of what belongs to you? Both in terms of a position of authority, I'm the next leading male or surviving male. And aren't I the heir of your great wealth? So this deconstruction of the traditions, this removal of the old and the Homeric traditions, the emergence and the making space for something new is brilliantly happening under the pretense of this very common and natural way of talking about the hierarchy between father and son, and authority and wealth passing from the father to the son. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. The structure, the rhetorical structure of it, the meaning of it, the flow of it, the comedy of it, it's stunning. It's stunning. That's why this book is still one of the 4 or 5 most important and powerful and transcendent things ever written. Just even that little passage, we could spend whole lecture. All right. So Cephalus hands the discussion over to his son. And the pursuit of justice is allowed to take place from within the context. This is why it's so powerful. From within the context of the traditional and accepted norms of family and hierarchical relationships. Polemarchus claims that it is only just that he takes over his father's position. But as I said a few minutes ago, here's the heaviness about it. It is precisely those commonly accepted notions of patriarchy and authority that are slowly being dismissed and undermined. As the Republic continues, wisdom, philosophical knowledge will become the foundation that justifies authority. So Cephalus is allowed to leave. The old are allowed to leave. The traditions are allowed to leave. And as the traditions go, a new form of power and authority will emerge. And that will specifically be a kind of authority, whatever authority is in the Republic. However it is that philosophers answer the question, who rules and why, it will be based on wisdom. It won't be based on this kind of aristocratic, paternal, patriarchal system. Beginning now, authority will be grounded in knowledge. Knowledge about what? Justice. Knowledge about what it means to be a human being, hence human nature. And philosopher kings will ultimately rule. All right, so now let's move on to Polemarchus. So Polemarchus's position, now we get to the second account of justice, right? What is this? So Polemarchus has taken over for his father in the debate with Socrates about what justice is, right? And Polemarchus's position is a kind of modification of his father's, but still connected to the Homeric traditions, because we've seen it many times throughout the course. And so Polemarchus's position is a modification of his father's, and it has something to do with understanding what we owe, right? What do we owe, right? Because Cephalus had said, justice is giving back what you owe, right? And Polemarchus's position is going to be a modification of that. It's gonna have something to do with what is it that we owe, right? What do we owe, and to whom do we owe it, right? And so the conversation between Polemarchus and Socrates now develops. And so now we are into the second account of justice. So if you're looking at the outline, we are now on the outline moving to Roman numeral 2, section B, Polemarchus, benefiting friends and harming enemies, right? And so the conversation between Polemarchus and Socrates develops, and they're kind of going back and forth. And finally on page 8, Polemarchus gives his account of what justice is. Polemarchus gives his account of what justice is, and it's a modification of his father. And it comes in 2 passages on page 8. So on page 8, line 332, just above B, right? Socrates is paraphrasing Chaerephon's position. And he says, Polemarchus's position. And he says, Polemarchus supposes that friends, what is justice? Justice is doing good to friends, benefiting friends, and doing harm to enemies, right? What you owe to friends is to do them something good, and what you owe to enemies is to do some harm to them, right? And so Socrates is kind of paraphrasing this, and he says, for Polemarchus supposes that friends owe it to friends to do some good and nothing bad. And then about 10 lines down, right in the middle of the page, Socrates said, and I also suppose that an enemy owes his enemy the very thing which is also fitting, some harm. Okay, so Polemarchus's position is justice is benefiting friends, doing good or benefiting your friends, and harming enemies, right? And this position is restated on the top of page 9, right at 332E.
Professor?
Yes?
This sounds a lot like a tribal conception of justice.
Oh, hold on. We're going to get there, my friend. Yeah. And so, James, you're right on the money here. You're absolutely correct. And when I said a few minutes ago, this is what I was gesturing to, right? Polemarchus's position is still informed, I guess would be the right word, still informed by the Homeric traditions. Okay, absolutely. And so I'm going to, in 2 minutes, I'm going to respond directly to your point, because we've seen this argument in many, we've seen a version of this argument in the Antigone. We've seen a version of this argument in the Apology, and we've damn sure seen a version of this argument in the Crito, right? In fact, Polemarchus.
This is almost the definition of Crito's actions.
It's one of them, right?
Yeah.
Right. It is absolutely. It's Crito's notion of friendship, benefiting friends and taking care of the brothers and harming the enemies. Right. So clearly, Polemarchus's position is still informed by the Homeric traditions. So and so again, right? You're right. So the father's gone, right? Right. And so we can begin the process of replacing the traditions, replacing this account of justice, and replacing this account of authority with something new. But we're still early in the conversation, right? Right. And if I wanted to be playful and I guess kind of fascinating, right? Let's have fun with Plato's text, right? Polemarchus said to his father, "Aren't I the heir of your position in the debate?" Right? That's what I'm quoting. I'm quoting Polemarchus on the other page, right? So we would absolutely. So technically speaking, I love Plato, man. Right? We could just do a whole. One day, I'm going to do a whole semester just on the Republic, nothing else, right? Because we can spend 10 days talking about 4 lines. But even using Plato's language, Polemarchus says, "Aren't I the heir of your authority and your position and your wealth?" Right? And Cephalus says, "Yeah, here you go, my son. It's all fucking yours. I'm old and I want to go party. Right? I want to go back." Right? It's fun. It's brilliant. So even if we just play with the word, if we seize on that word heir literally, Polemarchus has just inherited the Homeric traditions, right? He's just inherited his father's traditions, right? And he's going to try to defend them in some way, even though they're now having a conversation that's ultimately going to lead them to the creation of an entirely new city, right? So you're right, James. This sounds familiar. Okay, so on the top of page 9, right? He says, so justice is being able to help friends and harm enemies. That's what justice is. Justice is helping friends and harming enemies. All right. Now, as James said, and he's absolutely right, before we get into Socrates' response, I want to just bracket the discussion here and elaborate on where we've seen this. And we've seen it in 3 profound ways already. And in each example of the 3 where we've already seen it, we have witnessed the catastrophic consequences of this account of justice, and more importantly, right, a misunderstanding about what friendship is and what doing good for people is. Okay, so Polemarchus' position is that justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies, which is, as James said, a version of the Homeric traditions, another version of the Homeric traditions account of justice, right? And we've seen this, and James added the tribal conception of justice element of it. And we'll kind of link that up in a second. But we can identify 3 critically important parts in the readings that we've done so far where we saw this. First, in the Antigone, the whole drama of the Antigone, the whole drama, part of it, major part of it, was Creon. And Creon this was Creon's notion of justice in the Antigone. He is going to benefit a friend, Eteocles, who died fighting for the city, defending for the city, and he's going to harm an enemy, Polynices, who died attacking the city, even though they're brothers. Right? They're from the same royal family. Right? They're all related. Eteocles, Polynices, Creon, they're all related. They're all part of the same royal family. Right? But there's been a dispute inside the royal family about who's going to rule. The two brothers can't find a settlement. They kill each other in battle. Creon becomes the king. Right? And Creon believes, and this was James's riff on this. Creon believes that it is his moral responsibility to please the god, the tribal conception of justice, that it is his moral and political responsibility, right, to honor the friend. Eteocles gets the sacrifices, gets the burial, and to harm the enemy. Polynices is left to rot. So Creon's entire notion of justice, in some ways, is benefiting friends, harming enemies. And in this case, given how he understands his responsibility to the gods, his moral and political responsibility, Eteocles is seen as a friend. Polynices is seen as an enemy. And one brother is benefited with the burial sacrifices and the rituals and the glory, and the other brother is harmed. The enemy is harmed by being left to rot, to be scavenged by birds and dogs. So this conception of justice, benefiting friends, harming enemies, is at the core of the Antigone. This is huge, right? And so not only is it there in terms of just its factual example, right? But it's also at a deeper level, the problems associated with it are there. And so you think, well, what do I mean, the problems associated with it conceptually? Well, it turns out that even in the Antigone, there is a debate about who the friend and who the enemy is. Right? It's one thing for Creon to say, look, justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies. Okay, that's one thing. And we see the consequences. One brother celebrated, one brother harmed. But we also saw inside the Antigone, as a kind of element in the drama, another important element in the drama, is that Antigone doesn't see Polynices as an enemy. Antigone sees Polynices as a brother, right? Antigone doesn't make the friend-enemy distinction. They're both brothers. One isn't an enemy, one isn't a friend. They're both brothers. And she has a moral obligation, given her understanding of her responsibility to the gods. She has a moral obligation to give them both burial, to benefit them both. Right? So in the Antigone, we see this example of justice, benefit friends, harm enemies. We see its consequences, and we also see a deeper kind of conceptual crisis. Right? Because there's a conflict even in the family about who a friend and who an enemy is. And this whole question of how do you know who your friends are and who your enemies are is a really important issue. And again, more on that in a second. I've said too much already about that. All right. So,
hey, Professor.
Yes.
I just want to interject too that one's friend is another's foe.
Again, yes, of course. And so Samantha, we're going to get to that in a second. Okay. Yeah, this is a problem. There's no doubt this is a problem. Okay. Now, the second major place where we saw this, right? Socrates' trial. If you look at the trial from a certain kind of not abstract, that's the wrong word. You could frame the whole trial, I suppose, right? If you wanted to be not well, playful, have fun with it. You could see the whole trial as a kind of benefiting friends, harming enemies experience. The city of Athens, right? The city of Athens thinks Socrates is what?
Enemy.
An enemy. Love you, Samantha. Perfect. Right? The whole damn city sees Socrates as an enemy. Right? Miletus sees Socrates as an enemy. Miletus sees his fellow Athenians, the fellow jurors, and all the other Athenians assembled at the trial. Miletus sees the Athenians as his friends. And in fact, he's benefiting in friends by bringing charges against Socrates, right? Right? Miletus is benefiting his friends in the city, his friend as the city, right? By bringing these charges against Socrates, who they see as the enemy. The enemy to what? Their traditions. Corrupting the youth, disrespecting the gods. Socrates is the enemy. So the whole trial can be seen in a kind of, from a 36,000 foot view, if you kind of step up and you look at it, right? The whole trial is a kind of conception, is a playing out of the Homeric conception of justice in this regard. Benefiting friends, harming enemies. This is exactly what Miletus is doing. Miletus is benefiting his friends, his fellow Athenians, his traditions, and he's harming the enemies, people that seek to harm the friends and the traditions, right? They see Socrates as an enemy, right? And they harm him. They kill him. Protect and benefit their friends, kill the enemies. And then the third way we've seen this is in the Crito, and as James said, this was the whole point, in a weird way, this was the whole point of the Crito, right? Which was just so devastating, right? Because Crito's whole position, justice is first protecting yourself, right? Crito says to Socrates, hey, you got a chance to escape. I've just taken all my money and I've bribed the guard because you're my friend and I'm taking care of you, brother, right? And you've got a chance to escape. So first you owe it to yourself to go, right? Remember, Crito says that? Crito says, you seem to me, when Socrates says, no, I'm not going, Crito says, God, Socrates, you seem to me to be doing something unjust. You have a chance to save yourself, but you won't, right? And then Crito says, do it for your kids. Do it for our friendship. Crito says, do it for our friendship. Right? So the whole Crito can be seen as a benefiting friends, harming enemies, kind of dynamic. Crito thinks that he is Socrates' friend, even though his conception of friend is catastrophically flawed, right? Part of the devastating, the heart of darkness stuff we're kind of bearing witness to here. Right? But Crito's whole position is benefiting friends and harming enemies. That's what he's done. He's destroying the city in order to protect his friends. And let me just nuance this a little bit and don't let me go on a 12-day rant about this, which is impossible. I say that to protect myself. When Crito is benefiting his friend Socrates and harming the enemies, who he's harming are the demos, the demos Athenians, the poor lower middle class Athenians who had ascended to some power, because there was a conflict between the aristocrats, between the oligarchs and the aristocrats and the demos. There was an internal political battle between these two forces. And Crito is angry that it was principally these demos that that voted Socrates' death. So Crito, Crito has a very specific idea of friends, enemies. Socrates is a friend, and Crito and his wealthy aristocratic oligarchic friends, like Plato's uncle Critias, they've raised some money to protect their friend, and they're going to harm their enemies. These uppity demos, right? These plebeians that shouldn't have any power, shouldn't have any say. So again, friends, enemies. So this is a major element of justice in the Homeric traditions, and we've seen it in 3 significant ways. And so it's a problem, right? So whatever they do in the Republic, they're going to have to solve the friend-enemy problem. Whatever this new city is, whatever's coming on Tuesday, whatever's coming next Thursday, right? Whatever this new city is, the Republic that they're going to build, one of the major problems that they have to settle is who the friends and enemies are. And this is directly related to the observation Samantha just made. One person's friend is another person's foe, right? And this is a huge problem. It's a massive problem for politics. And we're going to see in a very dramatic way, beginning Tuesday and beginning Thursday, and until the end of the class, we are going to witness in a very dramatic way how philosophy responds to the problem of the friend-enemy distinction in politics. It's massive. Okay? So, now back to the discussion between Polemarchus and Socrates. So Polemarchus says, look, justice is benefiting friends and it's harming enemies. Socrates says, okay, that's something to do with what you owe. You owe friends benefit, you owe enemies harm. It's a modification of their father's position. Okay, that's not so bad, right? And Socrates says, like he did with Cephalus before, he says, well, okay, so think of it like this, Polemarchus. He says, is it possible, Polemarchus, that sometimes people make mistakes about who their friends are? Sometimes people make mistakes about who their friends are and who their enemies are. Right? Sometimes people make mistakes about who their friends are and who their enemies are. And if you make a mistake, for example, say it's you, if I make a mistake, right, in who my friends are, maybe I think James is a friend, and I have whatever reasons to think that, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Right? Say I think James is a friend, and I believe him to be a friend for whatever my reasons are. But in truth, he's actually an enemy. He's really not a friend at all. Maybe he wishes me ill, or he's just pretending to be my friend, or he's just putting on a show. Right? But I believe him to be my friend. I've made a mistake about who my friend is in this case. And Socrates says, if I, Nick Dungy, make a mistake about who my friends are, and I do things to benefit my friends, who really aren't my friends, but they're my enemies, I am in fact then doing something beneficial to my enemies. Right? If people make mistakes, if justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies, and for whatever reason people make mistakes about who their friends are, and by the way, they can make those mistakes quite sincerely, right? Creon I don't necessarily want to say if Creon made a mistake about who the friend's enemy was, but Creon made an honest assessment given what he knows about who the friend and enemy is, right? Athens, right? The whole damn city of Athens was fundamentally wrong about who? Socrates. right? The whole damn city of Athens was wrong about who their friend was and who the enemy was. Socrates was their friend. Socrates was trying to help them. And the whole damn city was wrong about who their friend, who's the real friend. In this case, the real friend isn't Miletus. The real friend is Socrates. But the whole damn city of Athens was wrong about how it understood and who it understood its friends to be. It was fundamentally wrong. Socrates was a friend to the city. They did not understand that. The Athenians made a mistake about that. They didn't see it. And they treated the friend as an enemy. And in doing so, harmed themselves, did an extraordinary harm to themselves. Right? And so Socrates says to Polemarchus, look, if we admit, which is a kind of common sense thing to do, that sometimes, even well-intentioned and even under normal circumstances, sometimes people make mistakes about who their friends are. And if they think someone is a friend, but this person is in actuality an enemy, and the friend does benefit to this person, he's actually doing a benefit for the enemy. Right? So Socrates says justice can't simply be benefiting friends and harming enemies. Or maybe you mistake an enemy for a friend. And you do some benefit for this person, and in fact what you're doing is ending up benefiting your enemies, because you didn't see the enemy as an enemy. You made a mistake.
Professor?
Yes?
Could you describe Polemarchus's idea of justice as being naive?
No, I don't think it's I would actually say the opposite. It's profoundly intuitive in a weird way, right? And first of all, it tends to be our own, in a weird way, it tends to be our own notion of justice still, right? We don't have to necessarily say it's associated with the tribal conception of justice, but if you ask people now, I mean, you see this now in America, right? Justice is taking care of your friends, taking care of the neighborhood, it's taking care of the block, it's taking care of the tribe, and it's harming enemies. This is a very kind of a deep notion of justice, right? And not only is it kind of in this kind of deep intuitive sense, but even Crito. Think about Crito, right? Crito was very wealthy. He was very powerful. He was politically connected. He was advanced in age, so he wasn't young. He wasn't naive. He wasn't immature, right? He was an elder statesman. And even for someone like Crito, this was the conception of justice: benefit friends, harm enemies, right? And there's something very kind of, I don't want to say deeply intuitive, but there is, in this kind of weird way. And because it's powerful. I mean, we have not moved 1 yard conceptually in terms of a different conception of justice in 2,000 years. Period. What's happening right now in the fallout of the election and the tension in the election is absolutely, in one version of it, it's absolutely that. Benefit friends, harm enemies. Donald Trump, and again, I'm not making an ideological argument here. I don't have no interest in talking ideology or partisan politics with any of you. I really don't. Not the point of this class. But you could look at Donald Trump a week ago, and whether he's out of his mind, he's saying things that are illegal, it doesn't matter. I don't care about all the minutiae. We could talk about that for another week. But Donald Trump sat up there and he asked his attorney general to arrest his political enemies, right? He asked Attorney General Barr, he asked Lindsey Graham and the Senate Intelligence Committee, right? He asked Barr to arrest him, and he asked his friends on the Senate Intelligence Committee to begin investigations that would harm them. So here it is, it's right there. Justice is benefiting friends, harming enemies, and using power, in this case, political power and media and influence to do it, right? And of course, the big question is, well, as Samantha said, one person's friend is another person's enemy, so you're going to have political crisis about that, right? And then there's just the whole question of whether Donald Trump is wrong about that, right? Is Donald Trump wrong about who his friends are? Right? Is he wrong about who the enemies are? So I understand what you mean, James. Like, is this kind of naive? Like, in a weird way, it's simplistic. I get that, what you mean. Like, fuck, how could anybody think that? Right? But if it wasn't so deeply entrenched in the historical consciousness of people, and even in Western political philosophy, I mean, we haven't moved 1 minute from Polemarchus's position to Donald Trump.
Because I know in my personal experience living in Rwanda, this is justice. This is the understanding of justice, is that either you're with the dictatorship, you're with the party, you're with the state, or you're not.
You're not. That's right. That's right. That's right. And so I think your word naive, maybe it's simplistic, but
yeah, I think I chose the wrong word.
Yeah, it's deeply rooted for some reason in human consciousness, right? Which by the way is fascinating and terrifying, right? This is why we do political philosophy. Okay, for God's sake, this is why we do it, right? This is why we do it. So we're not Creon. So we're not Polemarchus, right? So we're not Euthyphro. All right. So right in the middle, 3/4 of the way down the page on page 11, right? So in the middle of the page, let me go back to the middle of the page, page 11. Socrates says to Polemarchus, but don't human beings make mistakes about this, who the friend is and who the enemy, so that many seem to them to be good, although they are not, and vice versa. So for them, the good are enemies and the bad are friends. And Polemarchus says, yeah, that sometimes happens. And then Socrates says, but nevertheless, it's still just for them to help the bad and harm the good. And Polemarchus says, yeah, I think you're right, Socrates, right? Then Socrates says, according to your argument, it's just to treat badly men who have done nothing unjust at all. Right? Which, by the way, is what the Athenians did to Socrates. In the name of justice, they treated badly someone who did no injustice, Socrates. So Socrates is talking about himself. Right. Brilliant. This book is brilliant. And then at 334e, Socrates says, then for many, Polemarchus, all human beings who make mistakes, it will turn out to be just to harm friends, for their friends are bad, and just to help enemies, for they are good. So we shall say the very opposite of what you said earlier. And then Polemarchus says, you're right, that's correct, Socrates. It turns out that way. And then Socrates says at the bottom of the page, then the man who seems to be good and is good is a friend, while the man who seems good and is not, seems to be but is not, is friend. And we've got to know the distinction. So now, 2 things to take away from here. it is really important to know what friendship is, right? It's really important to know what friendship is, right? And so far, we don't know what that is. We have a problem with that. Creon had a problem knowing who the friend and who the enemy was. The Athenians had a problem knowing who the friend was. Crito believed that Socrates was his friend, but Crito's notion of friendship wasn't good. Because if Crito really was Socrates' friend, he would have never come there and asked Socrates to do something he knows Socrates would not have done. Right? So there's this issue of friendship. What the hell is friendship? And then two, the second issue, equally as important. It's not enough to know what friendship is. You also have to know something about what is good for human beings, right? Because justice is benefiting friends. If justice is benefiting friends, which we're going to move on to a different notion of justice to be sure, but even if it were, excuse my grammar, you better know what friendship is, and you must know what's good for people, right? You must know what's good for people. And Crito was wrong about both, right? Crito thought he was Socrates' friend, and his conception of friendship was flawed, and his conception of what was good for people was flawed. So Socrates overcomes Polemachus's position by the counterexample that he does, but the moment raises two really important things, two really important questions. Who are our friends and how do we know? And equally as important, what is good for people? Right? Even if I am your friend, even if I'm sincerely your friend, but I don't know what's good for human beings, then I'm going to harm you. I'm going to give you advice that's going to harm you, even though I think it's benefiting you. All right. Let's stop there. We'll have to do the debate with Thrasymachus on Tuesday. Stuff is just so dense, but we got plenty of time. So we're going to finish chapter 1 on Tuesday, and then we start book 2. Great observations, you guys. Have a great weekend, and sending lots of love.
Be well, Professor.
Yep. Bye,
Professor. Snow happens soon.
Yeah, I am waiting. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, love you guys.
Share. Bye.